Committee. I'd just like to remind members that these proceedings will be recorded and therefore made available for public listening at a later date. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 1 of the agenda, Sederunt and apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Mayo and Councillor McClung. Councillor Collins had hoped to substitute for Councillor McClung, but also gives his apologies.
Councillor Smith will be along in a moment. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. We shall move on to item 3, which is a presentation on the Small Communities Housing Trust. Excuse me. And to give that will be Jamie Dent, the Chief Executive Officer. Jamie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank members for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I'm just going to try and keep it as brief as possible, but an update on what we've been up to. And I'll just pile on in if I may. Oh, yeah. So basically, I think you should all know what we do, but it's not the first time I've come to talk to the committee, but we aim to promote and support rural housing investment in small villages and settlements across Dumfries and Galloway. We have a fairly broad range of work. We work in no particular order with private sector developers. We're working on the provision of self-build plots. We do community housing needs surveys. We have a project realizing affordable rural homes. There's project development, which is basically trying to build up new things coming down the line, looking for new opportunities. We do a fair bit of lobbying and consultation responses, and we provide advice and support. In terms of the private developer sector, well, we've developed and we manage what I think is probably the main method used currently for developers to meet their affordable housing requirements on smaller scale sites in rural areas. Essentially, developers, if they're doing 10 houses, that would be two affordable units. Typically, they're sold through us at an agreed discount to people we nominate locally as meeting our allocation requirements. We then put a legal restriction on the property so that it can't be a holiday home, it can't be a buy-to-let property, and most importantly, that when it comes up for sale again, it must be offered back to us first at the percentage rate of discount that was provided in the first place. We've secured well in excess of £1 million worth of private subsidy. Those are on approved planning consents. There are some that have dropped off the other end in that they're now obviously no longer going to go ahead, which I've removed from that figure. This year it's been relatively quiet, but we've sold 4 houses in the last 12 months. One of which was one that we had previously sold. The property we were offered it again. The person's circumstances had changed, so we bought it back and we've then sold it on since. One of the houses was also sold to a community trust to create a rented home in Closeburn, which I'll give you more information on in a minute or two. There's 5 mid-market rental houses that we've negotiated as part of developers' contributions, where the developer is going to retain ownership of the houses, but rent them out according to a set of criteria established with the housing department here, generally at mid-market rent. That's in addition to the involvement we had some years back with the 8 houses at Dormant, the passive houses there, which we helped get built in the first place. There is also 3 developments we've currently got under negotiation. One in Moffat for 1 house on a larger site, one in Lockerbie, I think it's 7 houses there, and one in Beeswing. It's not a sector without challenges. It's been very quiet the last few years. We've only seen 1 new start on site in the last 18 months. We haven't seen a lot of planning applications coming through the process. Although I will say I'm beginning to feel the kind of green shoots of recovery, a few more conversations with developers people coming back and talking about sites that have been approved already, and also some new sites as well. Unfortunately, from my perspective, we're very reactive in this. We don't really control the developers in terms of where they're going to develop and when they choose to go on site. These are all their own business decisions. We can only react to what happens once they do. Also, mortgage finance is quite difficult to find for first-time buyers, but we've set up relationships with two lenders, that's the Bank of Scotland and the Cumberland Building Society, and we're constantly seeking more to see if we can make it a bit easier. We also have been working on self-build plots. We've got 3 fully serviced self-built plots. We've just started marketing in Manreath, £17,500 for a fully serviced plot. I think it's quite a good deal. The plots are sold subject to a buyback restriction, like the same that's done on our same rural housing burden that we use in the private sector. It basically means we have the right to preempt all sales of the resulting houses built at 23% less than the valuation. This represents the value that the council's funding that was put into the infrastructure. So we're basically safeguarding that in terms of future sales. There's also a scheme we've developed to defer plot payment so that for self-builders who are on a lower income and don't have so much capital to get started, it means that they can use the capital they have to get the house out of the ground to the point that their mortgage starts to flow. We've basically adapted this from what's being used in the Highlands for the last 2 or 3 years, sort of paying attention to the pitfalls that they experienced with their scheme and the tweaks that they've applied to it. And we're now bringing that to bear here. We do community housing needs surveys. We've done 4 in the last year, 2 in Moffat, 2 on the needs of younger people, 1 in Moffat, 1 in Langham. We found there that traditionally younger people don't really respond to our surveys. It's very difficult to access them. In this particular instance, we got over 100 responses in each community, which was quite impressive considering we'd normally expect 1 or 2 in each community. Also, we've done 2 housing needs surveys, 1 in Sanker and 1 in Kellerholm, Kirkconnell, looking at the housing needs of older people. Where we're really with an eye to the future and sort of resources being tight, well, that's the way things are likely to become. We've been working with the Crichton Institute and the Third Sector Dumfries and Galloway to develop a concept of a kind of multi-agency approach to community surveys, partly because one of the feedback that we get from communities is that survey fatigue is a major issue. They get a lot of surveys. But also, if we're doing a whole group of surveys all at once, we can concentrate resources with other agencies, increase response rates, because we've got more energy to put into it, and save costs in the long run. We'll see how that works out over time, but I think there's quite a lot of enthusiasm about it. The Realising Affordable Rural Homes project. This is part funded by the council and part funded by the Robertson Trust. It works to involve communities directly in the provision of affordable housing. We're currently working in 7 communities. Closeburn, well, arguably say we've more or less finished in Closeburn, but Closeburn, Langham, Glenluce, Johnston Bridge, Money Ive, Moffat, Kirkconnell, Kellerholm. There are 2 or 3 other communities that we've been involved in, but the communities have lost interest or other things have got in the way, so I've not really brought those to, mentioned those. Closeburn case study is quite interesting, I think. Here we had a private developer who was required to do an affordable housing contribution. We'd also recently done a housing survey in the community and realized that there wasn't a very high demand for property to buy in the community. But despite there having been a recent Lawburn development there, there was still a very high demand for property to rent. So we negotiated a discount of 38% on one of the houses, and arranged for that to be sold to the Nith Valley Leaf Trust, the local community development trust. NVLT bought the house with a £35,000 grant from Clyde Wind Farm, and a loan from the charity bank, which we helped arrange, fixed rate for 25 years. It wasn't the lowest of interest rates, I think 6.5%, but it's very, very predictable. We help with landlord registration, setting up a tenancy agreement, setting up an allocation policy, establishing a management agreement with Lawburn. The community now plays a direct role in meeting its local housing need. It owns a significant asset with its wind farm money, and will have a source of income, which will increase as time passes, because as rents rise with inflation, the rent's set at mid-market level. But the mortgage payment's going to stay the same because it's a fixed rate payment. It's going to create some, I think, not insignificant income for the community over the long term. It's quite interesting because this is, as far as we're aware, the first time that wind farm benefit money has been used to fund communities actually to buy housing to address their own local housing need. And we aim to sort of trot this out as much as we can and look for other regions and other areas, well, other communities where this would be suitable, or it could be adapted. We had a few problems bringing it about, but I think we've now kind of realized where all those problems are and how we can address those. I think we've ironed out most of the problems, well, all of the problems there as far as I'm aware. Going on, Glenluce, we're working with the community and DGHP to look at applying a similar sort of model to a potential DGHP development on an old former hotel site in Glenluce. I think there's quite a lot of potential there, and certainly a lot of enthusiasm from the community. Glenluce has potentially a significant amount of wind farm funds coming in, and I think there's an interest in exploring longer term capital projects there to make sure that the best use is made of the money. In Moffat, there was initially a request from Moffat to become involved in this project because they were looking at providing housing. However, the community over time lost interest in this, or lost confidence perhaps. But the former academy site in Moffat became quite contentious as it was vacant. The proposals initially were put forward to look at social housing on the site, and this was met with quite a negative response from the community. Our project officer engaged with the community, discussed the whole issue with them, along with the community council, set up a community engagement plan, and now the community are working actively with DGHP to look at potential mix of tenure on the site, and is working on an option appraisal with DGHP. So I think that's quite a good positive turnaround from there. In Moniaive, we've been supporting a bid to the lottery, unfortunately unsuccessful, and to the Scottish Land Fund, amongst other funders, to bring about the purchase of a house. Well, it's a shop and house in the middle of the village. It's a bit of an eyesore at the moment. They want to turn it into a space that will provide housing and also office space for their community initiative. There's also an interest in looking at using some of their wind farm monies and other sources of funding to try and buy up some of the housing that's available in the village at the moment, and either to sell it on as low-cost housing or to rent it out. But there's still a fair bit of work to be done there. Kellerholm Kirkconnell, we conducted our housing needs survey up there into older people's housing needs. There was a very strong message from the community that they were very keen to see housing provision for older people within the Kellerholm Kirkconnell community. It was quite clear that that investment wasn't going to come from housing associations for a whole set of other reasons, quite understandable. But the community wanted to go ahead and explore possibilities for providing a very small 3, 4, 5 unit, still being discussed, but development there for older people who would otherwise have to move out of the community. And as it was very clear from our survey, there's a lot of people who really don't want to leave their community. There's a fair bit of resource there in terms of wind farm money, coalfield regenerations money, and we're working through that at the moment. In Langham, a similar case to Moffat, we were called in by the community initially, but it's been a lot of other activity going on with community development, the establishment of Community Development Trust, Scottish Futures Foundation, and this kind of thing. But we've been working with the Community Trust, the initiative, and to that extent the SDL Foundation, to look at developing a community plan to bring about the development of some vacant sites in the town and look at about, again, trying to get the community involved directly in affordable housing. Johnston Bridge, we assisted the community in their successful bid to the Scottish Land Fund to buy a chunk of land. And we've been working with them to look at the possibility, well, investigating the sites to see which bits are suitable for housing, exactly where the demand is, what kind of housing, and that work is still ongoing. I should also just add on that front that we've just received some news today that we've been granted some funding to extend the project from the Robertson Trust for the next year, which is quite good. We may be coming back to the council to look at possibilities of getting some match funding for that. In terms of the project development work that we've been up to, this is really just a sort of short summary of some of the things. We're working with 2 private landowners to bring about developments with higher than normal affordable housing provision, both in rural areas. Those are quite far advanced. We're also having initial discussions with 3 other landowners. We'll see whether they get to the same stage or not as time passes. We've been working with Buccleuch Estates to discuss development possibilities in Mid Nithsdale. They have a lot of vacant steading buildings, which are quite a problem for them. And they're looking at possibilities to bring about the redevelopment of these things, but with, again, significant numbers of affordable housing units within it. The Galloway Co-housing Group, we've been working with them, again, particularly quite a lot in the last few weeks, actually, but over the last year or two, which is really looking at supporting the development of an innovative scheme to develop a co-housing project in the region. Co-housing is a standard method in Scandinavia and Northern Europe for providing mixed tenure affordable housing. It's usually a situation where there's some part ownership, some rent, some affordable rent, all mixed together. It works on the model of kind of mutual support. It can be housing purely for older people, or it can be right through the age groups. There's a degree of shared facilities, although everyone can live independently within the site. It's not a gated community. It's not closed off from the communities around it, the community around it. But it involves a high degree of mutual support. And the research coming back from Europe and the States and Canada, where this is quite common, suggests that people live longer, healthier, and more independently in these environments than they would otherwise. And therefore present a lesser burden to social services, NHS, and a whole range of other agencies. We see this as potentially very important, especially considering the region's demographics. So we're still working on that. Council officers may hear from us shortly as we try and set up some meetings and some work there. We've been developing links with funders and lenders, including the Scottish Land Fund, the Charity Bank, Triodos Bank, the Ecological Building Society, the Robertson Trust, the Tudor Trust, to look at support and potential finance for rural housing. There's a number of banks, particularly banks and, I suppose you call it charitable venture capital, if they can really say it in quite those terms, who are quite interested in the whole concept of housing and community-owned housing. In terms of consultation responses and lobbying, we provide consultation responses on local government policy, so that includes the new local plan, when that was going through its process. And I've just started to sort of work on the new supplementary planning guidance that was released the other week on affordable housing and housing in the countryside. We've been lobbying the Scottish Government, particularly the Housing Minister, on rural proofing housing policy. One of our big issues that we've been trying to push is that low-cost home ownership government options, as in the ones put forward by the government, tend not to work that well in rural areas. I would accept NESI, the New Supply Shared Equity program from that. That seems to be reasonably, well, very successful. But Help to Buy is dependent on the involvement of larger scale house builders who tend not to develop in smaller communities. And the open market shared equity scheme, well, we've discovered that less than 2% of the sales in Dumfries and Galloway were actually in genuinely rural areas. That's actually amounted to 2 house sales, which is, I mean, it's a good scheme. It works well where it works, but we need to see schemes like this rural proofed. And I think the only way to get that done is to work through central government. We've been attending the Scottish Parliament Cross-Party Rural Affairs Group, well, when it's relevant, I should say, to ensure that rural housing issues in Dumfries and Galloway are raised whenever possible. We've been working along with our partners, the Highland Small Communities Housing Trust and Rural Housing Scotland, to provide some responses on government consultations, a variety of different housing matters, and the Land Reform Bill. We also provide general advice. We get phone calls and approaches, people walking in off the street all the time. That may be for dealing with people seeking rental property, either from housing associations or from private landlords. We advise tenants on how to resolve issues with private landlords. Sometimes acted as a go-between. We provide advice to first-time buyers or people seeking to buy on what they really need to think about, how they need to budget themselves, where they can source finance, and in some cases connecting sellers with buyers and buyers with sellers. We've been providing advice also to low-budget self-builders, people who haven't necessarily, who've managed to get hold of a site, but have got caught in the planning system on the finance side of things, trying to assist them. And we've had, in the last 12 months, 2 people go on site as a result of that. The whole other range of issues get covered, but that's a fairly neat summary. So to conclude, really, we work right across the region from Langham to Port Patrick. We have 2 full-time members of the staff and somebody who comes in half a day a week to do a bit of admin work. We do this on a budget of less than £100,000 a year. We work on a small scale. We attempt to innovate. We attempt to develop new ideas and adapt ideas from elsewhere if the existing models in the area aren't appropriate. A lot of what we do isn't immediately visible. It takes time to come to fruition. But we do get results, and we're quite proud of the results that we do achieve. We're very committed to improving rural housing provision across the region. But it's not just housing alone, it's how housing plays a role in resilient, sustainable rural communities. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'd be only too happy to take them.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll open it up to members for questions. Jim?
Jamie, you kind of answered the question later on that I was going to put to you. And I know you say you invest in small rural communities. Out of your 3 projects that you featured in your presentation, one was in Moffat, one was in Lockerbie. And I don't consider them to be small communities in any way, shape or form. They're towns. And I would hope that you're not going to drift away from how you sort of set yourself up in the first instance and how you present what you do to council members. And as I say, you answered the question because later on you said large providers not operate in small communities. And we've all got small communities that are really struggling, that maybe need a single house somewhere. Nobody will do it unless it's an organisation like yours. I suppose the question is, are you actually moving away from what you used to do, or are you still committed to these small communities? And just as a throwaway line, there's often change, and I can think of one community that you went and saw recently. Huge wind of change through the community council. It's completely changed the complexion now. New members, so even if that was the one that didn't show an interest then, it may do now. But I'd appreciate just a response in which direction or where you think your organisation is going.
I would like to reassure you that we have absolutely no intention of leaving aside the smaller communities. The only reason we have an involvement in Lockerbie is because we were approached by a developer who needed to meet an affordable housing contribution. And we felt that we could play a role in that situation where nobody else was likely to be able to do so. Moffat was really because we were trying to test bed something there and look at something there that was, we found that Moffat is a very, very strong area of housing demand. When we've picked up houses there before through the private sector route, they've shot off the shelves faster than you can believe. I mean, we put one advert in the paper and we had 12 responses by the end of the week. And so there's a very high demand there. But I do take note of what you're saying, very much so. And I do believe that the towns, smaller towns do have their own issues. But there are other providers who can go in there. And that's why in Moffat, we've said, right, okay, well, if DGHP is going to do something here, then let's work to support it and not work against it, because there's no point in having any competition. We're not in competition with any of the housing associations. We'd like to see our work as supporting them and in addition to what they do and going to the places, as you say, where they wouldn't otherwise go. I would be very keen to discuss with you which community you're referring to. We often find that issue, that communities lose a bit of interest, and it does come down to personalities. We're not always aware, with our only two of us, we're not always aware of how things change. But if there is a change in the community council, then, and there's a positive attitude there, then we're more than happy to come and address that.
Just briefly, I'll catch up with you, but it's one ahead. And it's one of these places where a social provider will no go. They just won't go. And certainly wouldn't put in a single unit because the management, the rurality, the whole remote location of the community makes that just not an attractive place for a social provider. And it's places like that. Now, in every place in the region, I'm sure, where they would welcome an innovative approach. And I just feel that, and you've just endorsed it by saying huge interest in Moffat because there is a demand there, therefore that's where social providers should go. And I would have thought your approach to offering some other solution to communities that can get that type of housing might be, well, where I was hoping you'd still be going, and that's why I asked you the question.
I can confirm I'm more than happy to go up to One Lockhead and have a discussion with them.
Exactly.
But any other community that size, I mean, that is primarily where we try to get to the places that other organisations can't get. If I can, yeah.
Right, thank you. Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. Mr. Dent alluded in his presentation to the situation in Monreith in relation to provision of self-build plots. There's no polite way of saying this, Chair. I didn't come here today to give offence, but the blunt fact of the matter is that there's a palpable degree of frustration, not to say alienation, in the Monreith community, as expressed by the Monreith District Action Group, at the way, in fact, this particular project has been developed, or as they would put it, has not been developed. Now, I am not going to give one side of the story today, so that's not my function, my role, but I would suggest to you, Chair, that the degree of alienation is such that I think there needs to be a meeting of parties with a view to getting this issue resolved, and I would hope that this committee today would authorise you, sir, as chair of the subcommittee, in conjunction with Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Lynch, representatives of the local community and the Small Communities Housing Trust, to get around the table, get these issues resolved, even at this late stage, if it's capable of doing so, failing which, or irrespective, Chair, we endeavour to learn lessons from what, in fact, has taken place in this instance, and to ensure, in fact, that these are taken forward for the future, and that there is no repetition of the difficulties which have arisen, as far as I'm concerned, and which could have been avoided, as it were, by appropriate and proper communication. And I would ask colleagues, Chair, to grant you that remit on the basis, sir, that you, for your part, in conjunction with your officials, are prepared to accept it and discharge it. I'd be very grateful. I think there's other issues leading on from what I've said, and I'll leave it to you or anyone else, who wishes to develop these. But I'd be grateful, sir, in fact, if colleagues would consider that.
Thank you, Alistair. Yes, I'm more than happy to take up that position if that's what members of this committee wish, and if Mr. Dent would agree to set up a meeting with his chair as well. I'll leave that for members to comment on, please. Jane?
Well, purely from a position of complete ignorance, what locus does this committee have in respect? I don't know what the problem is, no idea. So it would be helpful to know.
John? You?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The Monreath project was one of the investment and innovation bids that was agreed by the subcommittee back in 2011. It received funding both from the Scottish Government and from the Council. And it's a joint project between DGHP and the Small Communities Housing Trust, delivering 13 units, 10 of which are developed by DGHP, and 3 of which are self-built plots that Jamie referred to in his presentation. So there's clearly direct interest as both the strategic lead and the funder from the Council's perspective.
Thank you. Well, in which case then I suggest the chairman goes down and sees what he can sort out.
Are members happy with that? Thank you. Well, can I leave it for John to set up that meeting? And you're quite happy to facilitate that for us?
Thanks, Chair. Just to confirm, we'll liaise with Jamie to set that meeting.
Thank you. Ian?
Just a quick one in regards to, I'd like to get a wee bit more information in regards to what's happening at Langham, if that's possible, please, Jamie, in regards to a wee bit more meat in the bones. Interested in your procedures and as far as when a house gets returned, or there's a clawback arrangement there, so when a house, so it remains in affordability, or that affordable element in perpetuity, what's your financial state? Have you got to borrow money again? Have you got money, funds set aside for that, and just how that process works? And geographically on your self-builds, how widespread is that? Are you doing that right across the whole Dumfries and Galloway, or are you just at an early stage of that at the moment?
In answer to your first question, we have a £250,000 fund awarded to us by the council, which is set aside purely and only for buying back properties. The basic premise is that if we can buy back a property, we do. If we, for one, because if we've got too many properties that we're holding at the time and we can't access the capital, we would reluctantly turn down the ability to buy back, or turn down the buying back at that stage. However, that's not the end of the story, because when that house comes up for sale the next time around, our buyback condition is still there. So although in that sort of hypothetical situation, it would be regrettable that we didn't buy back that house, we wouldn't lose it forever, which is an important consideration. I think as the number of houses that we've got out there builds, then we need to look at boosting that fund. At the moment, we've only had to buy back one house. I think it's manageable at the moment, but we're conscious of this and trying to keep an eye on this in terms of where we're going in the future. In terms of your second question, which was about self-build, we have taken the view really that we want to see how things go in Monreath. Self-build was a very popular thing 10 years ago when finance was very easily available. It's now loosening up again. It became very difficult for a number of years. Loosening up again. Not to the same degree of looseness that it was 10 years back, but we want to see how this goes, and we would very much, if it's successful, we'd very much like to trot it out across the whole county, because it's, for the right person, it's a very useful way. Someone who has the right skills, who can provide a significant element of sweat equity into their build, can reduce down the cost of the build to them quite dramatically. So, potentially it's a very important thing, and we would like to see that be available everywhere. But it's getting access to sites, and it's also making sure that there is demand in the area.
And on Langham, Jamie?
Sorry, Langham. Langham is quite complex because of the issues that are going on between the 3 different community bodies that are there. And the sort of timing of things has been quite awkward. We were initially, from a project that we did, Hollywood Trust-funded project, looking at the idea of trying to secure the old police station in Langham. But it was very much that we weren't really in a position to be the landlord. We wanted a local community group to take this forward. We would help them with the funding and help them work their way through it, support them through it, but we wanted it to be a locally owned project. But it was identifying a community group who were actually willing to take that on at the time. And in the state of flux that things were at, that sort of fell by the wayside. The idea basically was to get young people working to restore the building and then getting the option of getting some of the housing that would come from the building in terms of rental property. We got funding, part funding for this from the Hollywood Trust, but we couldn't find a partner at that particular moment in time, and we had a deadline to meet before the funding closed off. But that's only one side of our work there. The other side of our work is to look at, there are two quite key vacant sites in the town, a number of issues going on about what's happening with the health centre, day hospital there, some property owned by Lawbone. And a lot of this is in a kind of, we're not exactly clear which way everything is going to go at the moment, but we're sort of hanging on in there and making sure that the possibility is kept alive.
Yeah, just with regard to the old police station at Langham, I know that the Eskdale Foundation are interested in taking that building on now and developing that into rented accommodation. So if you wanted to get back in touch with them, I know that they have approached the council initially to see at just sort of what stage that building is as far as selling it, because it is on the council's list for sale. It's surplus to requirements. But I am aware that the Eskdale Foundation are looking at possibly taking that building forward.
I was aware of that, but I wasn't aware how much public knowledge that was, and I didn't want to upset people locally by mentioning it, because what you're saying today, it's moved on a step from what I'd heard a couple of weeks ago. So that's quite good news, and we'll definitely be following that up.
Yes, Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question about how proactive you are with regards to engaging with communities. I'm a councillor for Castle Douglas and the Glen Kend, and I've visited a number of community councils over the last few weeks, where some of the correspondence, there was an invitation to the organisation's AGM, and it was generally met with a comment of, I've never heard of the Small Communities Housing Trust, what on earth do they do? And it was one of these pieces of paper that was just shoved to the side. How much do you get into communities? I notice there's no developments at all in the Stewartry, and as you'll be aware, there's substantial amounts of money coming into some small communities with regards to wind farm benefit and whatever. How proactive are you in engaging with the communities that maybe otherwise aren't aware of what you actually do?
Well, certainly up until 3 and 4 years ago, at that sort of time frame, we conducted some 18 community surveys across the county. Generally, there's a bit of we've stepped back from it slightly because of resources and time, but we're very keen to talk to community councils. Any community council that approaches us and says, we'd like to talk to you, I do. I've worked in the past, there was a lot of issues in St Johnstown and Dalry, and we offered our assistance there. The offer wasn't taken up. I've addressed some of the community councils, certainly Southern Stewartry, Polnackie and Auchencan. I've had discussions with, not necessarily at community council meetings, but with key members of staff, well, not key members, key members of the community council. We're very keen to get in there. There are a lot of community councils across the region. So, it's a case of how do we get there? But certainly, if there's feedback from elected members that there's an interest, then we're more than happy to follow that. And we're very proactive in that sense. But we have to also at the same time manage expectations, because we have limited capacity. And when we're busy, and we can go out and talk to a community, but we want to make sure that if we're raising issues there and raising hopes, that we're actually in a position to start addressing that. So the answer is yes, we're proactive, but we do have to try and manage expectations. But certainly, if there are any community councils, I'd be very keen to hear about them that you think there's an interest in.
Yes, Ian.
Just an query, because we're talking about outside bodies. We used to have a member on the Police and Galloway Small Community Housing Trust. Is it still a member? Is it still an outside body? I don't see it recognised from here, from the paper we have away from this committee.
No, we don't currently have a member on our committee. We certainly would welcome one. The council is, according to our constitution, entitled to appoint two elected members. Well, actually, our constitution doesn't specify whether it's elected members or officers, but I understand from a council point of view it should be elected members. And usually one from housing and one from the planning interest, and we would more than welcome that. It furthers communication and keeps the link strong.
Thank you, Jamie. If members finished with questions? Well, I think with that, and in view of members' comments today, I think that I would like to request that the Small Communities Housing Trust prepare a detailed report that is brought to this committee, setting out the details of the Trust's strategic plan and the business model. And that would allow members to consider how their plans relate to our current and future local housing strategy. And this would ensure any future partnership is strategically relevant and focused to our priorities. And if possible, if we could include the possibility of bringing one or two members onto your board, that would be very helpful, I would think. Alistair?
I'm grateful to you, sir. I would be totally supportive of that suggestion because it's manifestly obvious from the comments that I've heard here today that there's a number of members who are obviously wanting to have a better understanding, myself included, of the relationship and the relevance, as it were, of the functioning and activities of this organisation with the Council's actions and activities as Strategic Housing Authority. And I would be totally supportive of that.
Would you be able to action that for us, Jamie?
Certainly, yes. I'm more than happy.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just to confirm, I think what we do is we work with Jamie and the Trust to bring forward the report. We'd ask them to provide almost a statement of a business plan, the strategic vision, and we'd need to overlay that with a report from members from council officers. So we'll do that in as short a time as possible, obviously the first quarter next year.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, members, moving on to item 4, strategic housing investment plan. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the Council's strategic housing investment plan, identifying future priority projects, as revised guidance and standard documentation has been issued by the Scottish Government to all local authorities. Our revised SHIP must be submitted to the Scottish Government's Housing Supply Division by the 28th of November 2014. Can I ask John, do you have anything further to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. No, nothing further to add. Happy to take any questions.
Members?
Thanks. This is a daft question. Can John maybe explain what 3.7 on page 4 means, especially? It talks about community payment options, and it's almost, the way I read it, as if for 2 years we didn't ask for them. I don't know what this report, if that's what it's actually saying or no. Because there was a debate at planning about whether or no, when houses were built, that £1,500 was set aside per unit for a play area, etc. And this 3.7 deals with it. I'm struggling with the last paragraph of it.
John?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Table 5 of the SHIP is a new requirement that the Scottish Government have asked for us to include. Any units delivered for money raised through, essentially through the planning system, through the local development plan, and what arrangements we have in relation to affordable housing policy, which includes commuted sums. The table asks for retrospectively to look at what's been delivered in previous years, and the simple answer to that was, apart from specific Section 5 requirements, there was nothing, because the local plan didn't have that kind of fully formed affordable housing policy. And I think paragraph 3.7 is trying to make a distinction between what happened previously and what's contained in the new LDP with the draft supplementary planning guidance. And it's trying to kind of capture the fact that the policy position is in the midst of changing. So going forward, we expect to be able to identify further opportunities for a range of interventions, included developer contributions and commuted payment options. Commuted payment options essentially means the developer pays the council a sum of money in lieu of delivering houses on the ground, which we can hold, retain and spend elsewhere in line with our LHS and SHIP priority.
Thanks for that, John.
Ian?
I had a similar question on the same paragraph, but my understanding was a wee bit like, I think it used to be 25% affordable housing, and that was the end of, but we broadened that out, I think, as you've said. But there's one that stood out was the site in Gretna in particular got a permission granted. I just wonder if we could have, away from here obviously, but just get a clear understanding that that was actually implemented. I think there's an allocation there that may well slip through the net, and when I read that I thought, was this a time lapse? I read it like Jim at first in regards to was there a 2-year gap there? We weren't actually implementing this policy, but previously my understanding was it would have been about 25%, or when it changed there was then a raft of affordable elements that could have been used, including the community sum, or the 20% actual construction bill. The other point was 2.3.2. I'm trying to get an understanding of this question. In regards to, it says a project to bring 2 severely fire damaged properties back into the central lock side. I just got wondering that to get an idea of the cost, etc., in regards to that, and who the owners were. The automatic think it was DGHP, but was it actually private sector when you're reading that, and just how they kind of got, not against them in any way, just I've never come across this type of small element before in regards to fire damage, and obviously it links in with potential detriment into the local area, but just to get a better understanding.
Thank you, Ian. I think John will be able to provide that information you're asking on the particular site in Gretna. You'll take that through to Ian and copy himself into that. To answer the second part, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the 2 additional small-scale schemes that we've added to Table 1, which is proposed to be within the 1 to 5 year programme, the particular project that Councillor Carruthers referred to is two houses in the middle of Lochside. They were both owner-occupied properties. They were severely fire damaged. The owners and residents had to move out, and one's currently in homeless accommodation, the other's being accommodated elsewhere, and we're looking to bring those back into use in partnership with DGHP, because obviously it's a significant blight to the estate. The way that we're looking to do it is include them in the SHIP, so they'll attract the standard subsidy grant from the Scottish Government to enable us to intervene and get the properties brought back into use. In terms of the previous question, the schemes that have been subject to Section 75 is included in Table 5 were provided by the Strategic Planning Service, but we'll check to see if there's been any emissions, and if there's any additions to that, we'll make sure that they're included before submission on the 28th.
Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, sir. Let me say for the record that I would be totally supportive of the proposals in relation to the 2 properties at Lochside, and indeed I would cite the other example there as being very much similar, and that's in relation to the derelict property chair at 9 High Street in Whithorn. That was previously, there was a Section 179 amenity notice served on that property several years ago, and DGHP are currently in contact with the owner of the property with a view, in fact, to acquiring it and to providing a affordable housing unit and a pressurised settlement, i.e. Whithorn, and B, clearing up blight and dereliction as the process. Can I say, sir, that that's exactly what DGHP have done in relation to property at 24 High Street, Wigtown, where in fact the acquired property, which was in the process of having a notice served on it, and they're in the process now of providing 2 affordable units of housing in it. And as far as I'm concerned, that type of approach by RSLs, with the involvement obviously of the council, because the council have been well and truly involved in both of these as Strategic Housing Authority, that's what partnership working in this particular field to me is all about.
I have Jeff and then Jane.
Just table 4.1, where does the figure of 2.9 million carried forward to subsequent years come from? They're already in the existing reserve.
Yeah, that's essentially build up of balances from income received from council tax second homes. There's been various commitments made against the fund, and there's basically a lag between making the commitment and drawing the funds down. So that's basically a kind of running total that finance have provided in terms of that pot of money. The table below 4.2 confirms the money that's actually been spent in the previous 2 financial years. So that's money that's actually got out to support previous decisions of the
But the 2.9 is greater than the tax raise in 2012, 2013, 14, so it was already existing money within the fund supplemented.
Yeah, sorry, this fund goes back to 2005-6. So there's been a slow build-up of balances over that period of time.
Jane?
Thank you. Yes, I've been interested in this fund, as John knows, for some time. But I just want to go back, absolute fact. So these properties, the fire damage properties, end up in the ownership of DGHP. Is that what's happening?
Yes, the intention is that because the owners have got no means of bringing them back into use, that they need to be taken over by DGHP. They need to be essentially gutted and refurbished completely. It needs subsidy to allow that to be an affordable proposition, and that's why they're repairing the ship. So they would be owned by DGHP at the end of that process.
Okay, thank you. Colin?
Some obviously incredibly positive projects within the list in table 1. So I'm going to be pro Cullen here. I'm particularly pleased to see the project in Brook Street, the Unipart office as well. Looking at the projects in table 2, the sort of longer term projects, help me with my geography, but there's the Noble Hill Annan Road project and there's the Annan Road project. So there's effectively 2 projects in Annan Road. Whereabouts exactly are those 2 projects?
John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The Noble Hill project is essentially behind Noble Hill Primary and I think is it Aldi? Maybe Jim can help out because he's worked on the detail of this.
Yeah, the Noble Hill project runs from the existing Trust Housing Association development over Noble Hill Park back towards the Annan Road. So it's a huge site, huge development potential. And the second Annan Road site is the old Robinson and Davidson store cum offices near the laundrette behind it.
Okay. I have Ian for the second time.
Just 3.8, you touched on, but in regards to the transfer to the health and integration, I think it is the health and social care structures. I think that's health and social care integration board that'll probably mean in regards to that. Has that any got real-term or real-time implications for our remit and responsibilities through the Housing Committee?
John, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The public bodies regulations that came out from the Scottish Government earlier this year specified a range of mandatory functions that need to be transferred into the integrated model, and it cited equipment and adaptations provided under the 2006 Housing Act as mandatory functions to transfer. That effectively means the care and repair element of the scheme of assistance that currently sits within our remit, our budget. So we're anticipating that that will need to be transferred into the new body corporate model. We're conscious that those discussions are ongoing, but it was just to flag up to members that that's the likely outcome, although no specific decisions have been made. But it doesn't look as though there's any room for discretion within the regulations. It's quite explicit that it says it's a mandated function. And we've obviously flagged that up internally with colleagues, and we anticipate that that will be featuring in the integrated authority strategic plan that will need to be produced jointly by council and health as they move towards the integrated model.
Is there any implications for the housing committee then, as kind of as our duties? Will that be removed from us completely? And I know you're saying the financial side is, but the actual overlooking it, because it's like you're saying it's body corporate, this new health and social care integration board. It was certainly there'll be members from the council on it certainly, but in regards to what does it mean actually in real terms for us as a housing subcommittee?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, decisions will need to be made, and I don't want to kind of preempt any decisions, but it looks likely that what will need to be considered is how we remove that element, the equipment and adaptations element, from the current responsibilities through the scheme of assistance. The council, through this subcommittee currently, will retain all of the duties under the 2006 Housing Act, so nothing else will change. It's that specific element relating to equipment and adaptations. Obviously, there's a governance process to go through, decisions need to be made, and we'll need to see how that works out. But there's certainly a debate to be had and decisions to be made in relation to that.
But no further questions, but I think that's a red alert for me, kind of for removal of funds, but still, kind of, if the actual responsibility still remains with us. Is that not what you're saying? No.
Thanks. Just to clarify, all other responsibilities in relation to the 2006 Act stay with the council. So that's in relation to things like BTS. That's what I was talking about. The responsibility, along with the budget, is likely to transfer to the new integrated model for equipment and adaptations. We wouldn't retain the responsibility for it with the budget sitting up where everything would go across.
Jim?
Just a question, Chair, that probably can't be answered, but I presume, at least I'm hoping we'll agree the appendix do get into a bun fight about it. Are we absolutely confident that the high priority, medium priority projects identified within the SHIP, within the appendix here, will actually be delivered when we are predicting them to be delivered?
John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We anticipate that the programme will be fully funded over the 5 years. If you look at the core affordable housing fund, plus the additional kind of greener homes fund projects, plus the council funding, it's something like £34 million of funding over 5 years. We anticipate that all of that will be delivered. There is a slight question mark over the allocations that we will receive for years 4 and 5, but certainly the programme for years 1 to 3, we're confident that that will certainly be delivered.
With your indulgence, Chair, you maybe misunderstood what I was saying. The one of the, I don't want to use my parochial hat, I've used it often enough today, but one of the projects in here was described as being 13-14 as a delivery date. It now features as 15-16, and I'm not so concerned about the funding because we've agreed that it's the capacity for the varying organisations to deliver them on time or to ensure that they're delivered, because some of us have headaches going back countless years on pieces of land, and we're now that we're at a stage where we're on the cusp or the threshold to actually delivering something. Are we sure that the organisations that we agree with and have signed up to can actually do it within the time scale they claim they're going to do it in? Because it's clearly presented here without the different agencies being here to endorse that.
Yeah, I think, Jim, that's an important point really, because if we're allocating money to these particular projects, we need, as a council, we need to have the ability to make sure that the chosen developer is able to take that project forward. And if we get slippage on time scales, etc., then although the money is being allocated from Scottish Government, so the funding is in place, but it still has big ramifications if that site is slipped for 12 months, 18, 24 months, whatever. John?
Thanks, Jay. Sorry, I obviously misunderstood the first question. I thought the question was about certainty of the Scottish Government funding. You're talking about the capacity of the developing organisation. We're confident that the majority of the programme will be delivered on time as set out, but there's certain elements that are not within the council's control and sometimes not within the individual RSL's control either. So there's obviously those things that you need to build in. and that's things like delays in site acquisition, complexities around abnormal development issues, obviously the statutory processes that we have to follow. All those can potentially lead to some delays, but notwithstanding, which is kind of normal process, if you like, notwithstanding that, we're confident that certainly the capacity exists within both the developing RSLs to deliver this scale of programme, and based on the track record and the Scottish Government's view of our ability to deliver, we're confident that we can do that.
And the very last thing, Chair, with your indulgence, in that case, if the difficulty lies with the council in relation to acquisition, whatever, we can ensure that we, as a council, deliver to support the organisations that we are working in partnership with, and I hope we get that kind of undertaking here today.
And just on the back of that as well, with the priorities that we have set on the different developments, we have high, medium and low, is that mainly the responsibility of the developer to set the priorities, or does the council have a function in that, as in to say, well, actually we think that this particular community has a greater priority for affordable housing than, say, Dumfries Town Centre, as an example? I mean, how are the priorities actually set? Are they solely by the developer, or do we have an influence in that? And secondly, as well, as regard the funding to the particular projects, when exactly is that funding released to the developer? Is it a staged release, or do we allocate that funding at the start of the project?
Thanks, Jay. In terms of setting the priorities, what we've provided to members to agree is the outcome of discussions that we've had directly with the developing RSLs. And it's a combination of what we consider to be the key strategic priorities and the needs as set out in our local housing strategy, and also the deliverability and how quickly they can make sure they can move on the site. So it's a kind of combination of those two factors. In terms of the way that the funding is organised, certainly the Scottish Government funding is released on a phased basis, and it's on completion of certain points in the contract where works are complete. There's no upfront payment to the developing RSLs before any work's on site. They have to undertake the work, and then you draw down specific elements of the money, and that's why the phasing of the funding covers a number of years, because that reflects the development programme.
Thank you, John. Ian?
I'll just be brief here in regards to, I mean, I think Jim's touched on an important point there when it comes to that, and you've obviously followed up on it, but plan permission is usually a key point, kind of, once a plan permission is gained. And I just wonder if there's any stats in regards to when a plan permission is gained to when the actual site is usually built out. Is that usually within a year, 2 years, or what is it? Because obviously that's one of them key points that Jim's probably referring to.
John, I'm not sure, but would you have that information?
That's obviously a function of the planning authority. I can make that general request in terms of what PRs they collect, but I'm not sure they collect that. Once the planning consent's gained, I think the backstop is then the kind of land order that they take, but there's a lag between that. We can ask the question, but I'm not sure if we've got that.
Yeah, I mean, as we're aware, once planning permission has been granted, there is a time scale as well for the development to start, otherwise they have to go back and reapply again. Jim?
Aye, thanks. So just for clarification, I was not inquiring on the basis of any planning application being submitted, because clearly that's a function that another committee has, and I wouldn't have wanted to be even construed that somehow was trying to accelerate planning permission for developments based on my personal interest or interest of this committee. Nothing to do with planning. My question was about land acquisition and technicalities contained within the acquisition of land, and how we actually deal with that in the council's responsibility as an authority and council land ownership. That was, I didn't want to go into too much detail, because clearly it's a strategic function. It's not a local issue, much as I do enjoy local issues.
Okay, I don't think I have any further questions from members, so we can turn to the recommendations. We are asked to note the changes required for the Council's Strategic Housing Investment Plan through the revised guidance and documentation issued by the Scottish Government. Noted, thank you. And 2.2, agree the updated Strategic Housing Investment Plan as set out in the appendix. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is the Housing Options and Homeless Service. purpose of this report is to provide members with a comprehensive baseline performance information in relation to the housing options and homeless service. I'll ask at this stage if John has anything further to add to the report.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This was just a follow-up to the report that members considered about the service review at the last committee, and asking for more information about the size of the operation and the scale of it. What we've tried to do is provide a snapshot from a number of different sources, from SPIs, from some covalent indicators, and I think the key thing I'd point out to members is that in terms of a kind of overarching performance management framework, we haven't got one, and that's one of the purposes of the service review. So it's a snapshot that covers key elements of the homelessness service, but one of the things that we'd look to address going forward in terms of the service review is to make sure that there's more robust and holistic consideration across the whole service area around performance management issues. We're happy to take any questions.
Members? Jane?
Well, I'm glad John said that, because I'm actually a bit disappointed by this report. Coming into housing sub, I'm perfectly prepared to say I'm sort of new at this game, don't actually know how the thing is gathered together and how the housing sub considers that it is going to go ahead. I know this is actually new. Homelessness is new also to the housing sub. What I would have been looking for is, I suppose, a narrative about the levels and type of support. And really, we should be looking at how we prevent homelessness where it's actually unfortunately occurred, Chairman, and what options people are offered. It's that baseline narrative information which I'm looking for. I take the point that it's going to be part of a service review. Maybe I could be reminded when that's coming to us, when we'll get that level of information. And while we've got this in front of us here, will that review be dealing with a kind of wider look at how homelessness fits into council's priorities of supporting the vulnerable, the anti-poverty strategy? Why do people become homeless in the first instance, and what are we doing to prevent it? So it's a kind of wider look at this. This, I'm afraid, all it's done is whet my appetite, and I'm afraid it doesn't tell me anything other than we're not doing it frightfully well. And particularly, I think we should be concerned about is the percentage of cases being reassessed during the year. That's where we are clearly not performing, and we're not performing quite badly. 15% over 5% target means that people are reappearing, and they shouldn't be. So that's really, Chairman, where I'm coming from. When can we get and expect a level of detail in information which is not here?
Thank you, Jane. I agree that it is a very baseline level of information that we have here, but as the housing option service review was only agreed at the last committee meeting that we had, it hasn't actually given John a lot of time to get a lot of detail, and it was proved from that meeting through the thematic study carried out by the government that we were very poor in keeping that baseline information. So through this review, we would hope that a lot of those figures and a lot of that information will come forward, but I'll pass it on to John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Accept everything that Councillor Maitland said, and that kind of reflects the key messages that we were trying to get across at the last report that dealt with the start of the service review process. What we're trying to do is obviously look at the whole of the strategic housing and homelessness service following the Council's corporate service review toolkit. And in terms of where we're at in that process, we're really still at phase one. There's 5 phases, and as members have kind of gone through other service reviews, you'll know what the structure is. What we got agreement for last time was essentially stage 1C, which is agreeing through this committee that a service review is needed in the broad scope. We then need to develop the service profiles. We need to develop a detailed scope and report that needs to be signed off internally by CMT, and then brought back to this committee. And that's when we'd be setting out much more detail, where we've had more time to look at some of the information and the data that sits underneath it. So this was a kind of interim report requested by members, but it was always going to be a very quick snapshot because the bigger piece of work, the service review, needs to be done, and we need to make sure that we get it right. So in terms of the process, there'll be a scoping report brought back to members as early as possible into the new year. It's likely not to be the meeting straight after Christmas, but possibly the meeting after that. We then go through the service review process fully, where we consult and engage. We compare and benchmark, and that's where we get into the detail of how we're operating compared to other local authority areas. We go through a full option appraisal process in terms of what we think the service should look like and give options there. We have to go through the challenge panel process. It then comes back with the committee to look at that option appraisal process, agree options, and then a draft action plan and implementation. So we've got a lot of work to do, is what I'm trying to say, and we're still really at point one. We will be bringing this forward to members, but it will take, excuse me, it will take time to get right because it's a big service, it's an important service, and there's lots of things that we need to look at, not only in relation to how we process homeless applications, but how we provide housing support, how we provide housing options advice, how it links in with the wider strategic housing function. All these things need to be looked at, and that will take time. But in terms of members' expectations, I understand that you're looking for answers, but we need to go through the process before we can give you those answers. And what we need to do is follow that corporate service review toolkit that members have agreed is the way to undertake these fundamental service reviews.
I think as well, Jane, that through the figures that have been provided, and you mentioned them with the reassessment figures, where we are falling behind. At this early stage, it highlights that, and so we can actually get to work on seeing how we can deal with those particular issues at this stage as well, while the rest of the service review is ongoing. But at least that's highlighted early, so we can start and look at a program to see how we can deal with it.
That is very helpful, Chairman. Thank you. I certainly welcome that assurance. I think what we mustn't forget is that this is actually about people presenting with problems, and we're here to represent those people. And I think we'd like to know a little bit more about what it actually means, because I have a suspicion there will be hotspots in particular areas, and I think that's what we need to know. So the next time we're going to see this is a full scoping report. You're saying not the meeting after Christmas, but the meeting after that. What does that take us into?
Well, the timetable's not been confirmed, but it's likely to be March. So we're expecting there'll be a subcommittee in January, and then there'll be a meeting in March, and we would hope to bring a report to the scoping report to March Housing Subcommittee. And in terms of what the scoping report needs to cover, it's under phase 2 of the service review scope, and it needs to look at covering things like the review of the budget, the business planning process, the service profiling, and essentially the detailed scope of what we're going to look at. So the key elements that you were talking about in terms of the narrative, that's where that will be set out in detail.
Okay, thank you, John. I have Ian and then Alistair.
Thanks, Chairman. When I first read the report, the first thing that stood out to me was the actual table 6 at 3.7. It looks like it's something that used to get a social worker, should have at least wait a social worker if it didn't. I just wondered, had it been there? And we've also got the common allocation policy. Again, it's starting to get embedded now. I thought that would have a positive effect in it. So I just wondered, that was the 2 points. Did this used to go to social work or not? Has it ever been to social work? Just with the SW starting off as the indicator, identification number, and the common allocation policy. I would imagine that should have a positive effect on these numbers.
John?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Table 6 relates to performance figures for 2013-14, so it goes up to the end of March of this year, and that's when the service still sat within social work services, hence the social work indicator for the PI. In terms of the reporting arrangements within social work, I'm assuming that it went to Social Work Services Committee and through the area framework monitoring arrangements, but I've not got that information to hand, but I'm assuming it was captured through their regular monitoring report. In terms of the operation of the Common Housing Register, as members know, we're undertaking the 6-month review. We've got a seminar on that arranged for next month for all members to come along to that. And we're starting that process to look at what impact the common allocations policy has had on the whole sector, and obviously specifically homelessness. Still at early stages yet, but we're kicking that process off, and obviously we've got the review process, which was agreed last month as well, to take that.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. As far as I'm concerned, you know, I think it's unfortunate, extremely unfortunate, after we conducted a large-scale voluntary stock transfer, I think a lot of the residual housing services, particularly from a strategic perspective, became fragmented. And it's only now we're beginning to, I would like to think we're beginning to address this. If you look at the last two sentences in paragraph 3.6, I mean, that to me, in many ways, sums it up, just exactly the difficulty as to where we are. It's not possible to provide a comprehensive suite of information because an all-encompassing performance management framework requires to be developed. All of the information the Council is currently required to gather and report is presently not available as a complete set of information. Now, that's not a good state of affairs, Chair, and I think it's absolutely imperative that is addressed with the maximum possible urgency, for want of a better term, to ensure, in fact, that we are in a position to provide the information which would allow us to be better informed and to take the decisions that we need to take.
Thank you, Alistair. Colin?
I think, to be honest, Chair, Alistair's made the very point I was going to make. If ever a report showed why we needed a review of housing options and homeless service, it was this report. I mean, the fact that we do not have a comprehensive performance management framework in place to even measure what we deliver in this service, I think is exposed by this particular report. In fact, as Alistair says, it's clear we don't even have the information, never mind the performance targets in some areas. Obviously, the clock's ticking on this, and March is quite a long way off. And does that mean that the report that goes to CCS in December will merely be a refresh of the existing indicators, or will there be new indicators brought forward at that stage, or we just have to wait until the review is completed before we actually put in place the maybe more comprehensive indicators?
John?
Thanks, Chair. The CCS-wide report to December will just identify some of the statutory KPIs. What we're talking about here is a much more fundamental performance management framework, which gives members the confidence that they know how the service is performing, both across the region, but also by each area. And that's what we need to develop as part of the service review. So that information will not be at hand for CCS. That was why we've suggested the service review. It's a bit of a kind of circular argument. We've identified that there's a significant problem, and that's why we brought forward the reports that we have saying we need to do something fundamental to address this. And this, as you say, is evidence, part of the evidence, and why we brought up the report in the first place, saying we needed this process in place. But it will take some time to do. I understand members' frustration in terms of how long it will take, but we need to make sure that we do a thorough job and we comply with the corporate service review process, which demands a level of detail that we'll need to make sure that we adhere to.
Thank you, John. I think if members agree, it might be appropriate then in that case with a concern regarding the timescale, and John's indicated that it would be March for it coming back to this committee, that if possibly for the committee in January, that John prepared not a report but a briefing note for members on the update of that review and where we're going with it. So it's not a full report but just a basic briefing note just to keep members updated. Yep,
that's fine, Chair. We're happy to do updates for the next housing sub. And if it assists, we can deal with it the way that we dealt with the implementation of the Common Housing Register, which is we give short updates for every housing subcommittee, even if it's just a short progress report about what's been achieved over the previous 2 months. So members keep engaged in the process.
Members happy with that? Yes. Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to echo what Councillor Gerrison-Maitland have suggested. I'm sort of disappointed. I'm still in the dark as to how the whole operation, homeless options and homeless service works. And I know there was concern with a few members at the last meeting that we didn't actually know what the process was and what interaction there was with external organisations and the whole process. And this report just actually raises more questions than it does actually answer. I was hoping the briefing would actually, we would have had a briefing note just now to give us even a very skeletal outline of how the process is, of people working through and at which point information is recorded. I'm still not comfortable with that at all. The other concern is if the report's not coming back to March, what happens if there's any budgetary impact when we'll have already addressed the budget in March?
John, I mean, as far as the homelessness process is concerned, I mean, if members requested, I'm sure that John could send that out by email to everybody, the actual process of the homelessness service, just to update you. But Jim, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think it's important to get across that what we're saying are that we recognise there are fundamental strategic planning and delivery issues with the homeless service, which is why we recommended a full-scale strategic review. So in terms of the concerns that are there, we absolutely share the concerns that you're expressing, but the reality of what we've got as a service that needs fundamental work to make it function well and to deliver well for homeless people into the future. So that's the problem that we're currently grappling with. And it's not a service that we can say it's a tinkering issue or we can change a performance measure. We need to actually fundamentally look at how it's structured, how it's strategically planned, how the budgets are aligned, how the services are delivered, and how we work with external partners. And that by necessity makes it a very large and important piece of work for the reasons that you're saying. It's not, in terms of the service review process, it will not be a tinker round the edges with the service. It will be a fundamental re-examination of how it's currently staffed, how it's delivered, and what it's trying to achieve. So going back to the point, say, about housing options, I think that the external inspection of that element of the council service recognised that the council didn't have a fully functioning housing options service. So it's not possible to provide performance information in a service that isn't in fact there. And what the service review will do is put in place recommendations that will put that service in place. But to get there, it won't be an inward-looking service review. What we will be doing is working with all of our strategic partners, because the delivery of the homeless service involves close working relationships, for example, with RSLs, with the voluntary sector, with housing support providers, with social work services. But unfortunately, those relationships require to be developed further, and we need to relook at how certain things are happening at the moment. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, while it would be nice to be able to give easy answers, quick answers, what we're saying is we've got a very difficult problem and a very difficult set of service delivery issues that we need to tackle, and it will take some fundamental work, and it's important that members understand that. This isn't about improving best value around the edges in terms of the homeless service. It requires a fundamental look at how things have been delivered.
Finlay, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that, and there's never been any doubt. I wasn't expecting you to tinker around the edges and come back and give us a solution. The problem is I have got no idea how it works at the moment. I'm not necessarily looking at performance figures as we move along. I just don't know how somebody off the street who's suddenly homeless works through the system. So I've got no idea whether in 6 months or in March, when you come back with the solution, actually how different it is from what we've got at the moment. I have no idea how it works at the moment and how you interact with external organisations. Now, that's maybe a problem. It's just I have personally. I don't know whether that's the feeling of the rest of the committee, but I don't know how it's working at the moment.
Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think the issue was that when the service was transferred back to strategic housing from social work services, I'm being very blunt here, it has a range of operational challenges. And what we're saying is the way it works at the moment is not the way we would like it to work at the moment, and it does require lots of service development. So in terms of, you know, the fundamental question I think you're asking is it delivering the best possible services that we can to homeless people at this point in time? I think the answer would be, well...
No, that's not what I'm asking. All I'm asking is how it works at the moment. Aye, well, what I should maybe do is declare myself homeless, and I'll maybe be able to find that out. It's on the very basic, simple. I'm not looking for you to tell me where it's gone wrong at the moment, because I understand that is a big job. I just want to try and understand on a very one-sided A4 how it seemed to work at the moment. That's what I'm trying to get at.
John will come in.
Thanks, Chair. I think what we can do is provide a description of what we think the processes are at the minute. But picking up on what Jim said, what we can't do is provide any assurances to members about continuity, consistency, and equity of the service. It's a patchwork at the minute, and that's what we need to address. So what I'd be anxious about doing is providing something for members, and you then think, well, that's it. That's currently the consistent picture. It's not consistent, and it's not uniformal in terms of quality. But we can provide a broad description of the process followed from somebody initially seeking advice through to potentially secure and permanent accommodation. But there'll be lots of caveats and lots of health warnings through that process. But we'll provide that. That's not what I understood from the minute of the last decision that you wanted. I understood it to be a snapshot of performance, which is what we tried to provide in the report. But if you want a narrative, then we can certainly do that and circulate that to members as part of the background as we move forward for the service review. But just to confirm and endorse everything Jim said in terms of the scale of the job that we've got to essentially turn the service around.
Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. Too often in this authority, sir, members are told what officials think they want to hear rather than what they need to know. And I would commend Jim O'Neill unreservedly for his responses, because by Jove, that is telling us just exactly what we need to know. And having heard it, you know, it's about time that we got on and did the business and produced the information that we need to.
Jim?
Aye, thanks. It's in the same subject. Do we actually need an interim report then? We know we better tell officers to go and do the job and let's see the outcome in March, because all we'll be doing is putting it, well, we've already asked for an additional bit of information, and unfortunately, members are approaching or being appointed to this committee at different stages in their understanding, which is no MD's fault. So a flowchart where we are at the moment, how we get there for Finlay, and let's get the report in March, and because all we'll do is put an additional report in here that doesn't actually tell us anything other than the direction we're taking.
I don't think it was a report that we were asking for in January. It was just a brief update on the situation rather than a full report to be discussed. It was just a brief note, if members were happy with that.
Chair, absolutely. That's all I was looking for. I wasn't looking for any detailed report that suggested where the thing might be falling down. It was just an indication how it went. If you remember the last House and Subway, actually, there was one member requested a seminar, and I think all that was for was also so everybody in this committee was aware of what the processes were at the time, not whether they were working or not working, just how the process was performed. But I'm certainly not looking for any report that would slow up the huge job you've got to turn the service around.
No, and we don't want to do that. We don't really want to burden officers with that extra piece of work as well when it's going to be such a full service review that's going on. But just a reminder really as well, if members are unsure on any of the reports and that come in, I mean, they are free to investigate that themselves. There'll be background papers available. They can talk to the departments. They can go out themselves and get that information without asking officers to bring that information forward. And again, is that best use of officer time? So information will be out there if we go and seek it. Any further questions? No? Thank you. We'll go to the recommendations, please. Members are asked to note the performance information provided at section 3 of this report in relation to the Housing Options and Homeless Service for the period of 1st of April 14 until the 30th of June 14. Thank you. And 2.2, that a comprehensive performance management framework will be developed as part of the service review of strategic housing services agreed by this subcommittee on the 26th of September. Yes, Alistair.
Standing the discussions that's taking place, can we put in perhaps some of the projected timelines that have come up? I think that'd be helpful, Chair.
Yes, I'm happy with that, if members are agreed to that. Yes. John, could you build that into that recommendation? Right. Thank you. I have no further business this afternoon, so thank you very much for attending.